The cold wasn't just in the air, it had seeped into my bones. I stood on the Jackson Station platform, the ancient heaters overhead doing little more than sighing warm dust. I clutched my son Miles tight against my chest, trying to shield him from the wind tunneling down the tracks. His small body, bundled in a snowsuit with sleeves that stopped an inch short of his wrists, was a precious, shivering weight. That's when I heard it, a voice cutting through the rumble of an approaching train and the platform's dull murmur. Amara, Amara Hayes, is that you? My blood turned to ice. It was a voice from a different life, a warm, safe life that felt like a story someone else had told me. I turned slowly, my movements stiff with more than just the cold. He stood there, a solid figure in a neat wool coat, a grocery bag in one hand, my father, Vernon Hayes. His face, usually etched with gentle laugh lines, was now a mask of stunned concern. 2 months. I dodged his calls, concocted elaborate webs of excuses about work deadlines and Miles's nap schedules. I'd cut our conversations short, my voice thin with a manufactured exhaustion. And now here he was, witnessing the living truth I'd been desperate to hide. The platform seemed to tilt. He sees it all, I thought, despair washing over me. His eyes, sharp and missing nothing, conducted a swift, terrible inventory. He saw my once puffy coat, now deflated and worn thin, the right pocket torn open and flapping like a defeated flag. He took in my boots, cheap synthetic things bought in a desperate online click, their soles so thin I could feel every pebble on the pavement. His gaze lingered on Miles in that painfully small snowsuit, then snapped back to my face. My own reflection in shop windows had shown me the gauntness, the purple shadows like bruises under my eyes. I knew he saw them too. And my hands, clutching my son, they wouldn't stop trembling. Not from the cold, but from a fatigue so deep it felt terminal, and a fear that was my constant companion. Dad, I managed. I tried to summon a smile, to fabricate normalcy, but my lips betrayed me, twitching into a weak, shaky line. He stepped closer, the concern in his eyes hardening into something more urgent. Amara, why are you at the subway station? His voice was low, tense. What about your car? I bought you that new Kia Forte for your birthday last year. What happened to it? I couldn't hold his gaze. I looked down at the grimy platform floor. I sold it, I whispered, the words ash in my mouth. You sold it? The disbelief was palpable. Why, Amara, what is going on? You look like you've been run ragged. Why aren't you answering my calls? He moved closer still, his voice dropping, straining. And where is Darnell? Why isn't he here with you and Miles? Hearing his name, hearing the simple, logical question, where is your husband? Was the final crack in the dam I'd built inside. For 2 months I had held it together. 2 months of suffocating silence, of cold fear that lived in my stomach. 2 months of complying with every demand, handing over money that wasn't mine to give, enduring whispered insults that stripped me bare, and living in a constant, humming dread of what the next day, the next hour might bring. Now, looking into my father's eyes, eyes full of a love and worry I had foolishly pushed away, I knew the dam was breaking. The pressure was too great. A sob hitched in my chest, and the tears I'd bottled for so long began to well up, hot and insistent. Dad, I breathed, the word barely audible over the screech of a train braking in the station. Please, let's go somewhere private. Without a word, he nodded. He took the diaper bag from my shoulder, his hand brushing mine, a brief, solid anchor in the swirling chaos. He led us off the platform, away from the crowds, and into the corner cafe, a place called the Corner Bistro. It was warm, smelling of coffee and baked goods, a jarring contrast to the desolation inside me. He found a quiet booth in the back. With a calm efficiency that felt military, he settled Miles into the high chair, ordered him an apple juice and a giant chocolate chip cookie, and then slid into the seat opposite me. He reached across the formica table and took both of my icy, trembling hands in his large, warm ones. Now, he said, his voice quiet but leaving no room for argument, tell me all of it. And I did. The words tumbled out in a desperate, fractured river. I told him how after Miles was born, what began as my mother-in-law's caring advice slowly morphed into something insidious. Loretta Jenkins started visiting more, her suggestions becoming directives, then ultimatums. I explained how she discovered that the two-bedroom condo downtown, my beloved grandmother's legacy, paid off and left solely to me, was fully in my name. How her interest sharpened from gossip into a calculated gleam. She started demanding I sign the property over to Miles, I whispered, my voice shaking. For his future, she said. I refused, Dad. I told her it was my inheritance, that I wanted to manage it myself. That refusal, I now knew, was the match that lit the fuse. My father listened, his face a careful, neutral mask, but I felt his grip tighten slightly on my hands. A week after I refused, I continued, the memory making me nauseous. You got jumped. Remember, near your house that evening, you said it was just random vandalism. I remember, he said, his voice flat. A flicker in his eyes told me he was reassessing that memory with new, grim information. It wasn't random. The next part was the hardest to say. The very next day, Loretta came to my place. She sat in my armchair, sipping tea like she owned it, and said, "How's your daddy doing? Heard he got roughed up. You know, things happen these days, especially to older folks. Next time it could be worse." "Much worse, Dad?" She was smiling when she said it. I watched the color drain from his face. A muscle in his jaw clenched, a tiny, rhythmic pulse, but he remained silent, urging me on with his stillness. I was terrified, but I still refused to sign. Then Darnell showed me a video. The tears were flowing freely now. It was me, supposedly screaming at Miles, shaking him, saying awful things. It's edited, Dad. They cut pieces from different times. When he was having a tantrum, when I was frustrated and talking to myself, they spliced it all together. It looks real. It looks horrifying. They said they'd send it to Child Protective Services if I didn't sign the papers, that they'd take Miles away and prove I was an unfit mother. A low sound escaped my father's throat, the first crack in his composure. "Those monsters," he breathed, the words thick with a rage he was visibly forcing down. "That's not all." I wiped my cheeks with the back of my hand, a futile gesture. "Loretta used some contacts. She got copies of my corporate documents and financial reports from work, and she forged them. Made it look like I was embezzling money. The numbers are changed, the signatures are faked, but it looks perfect. She said if I didn't comply, she'd send them to my boss and the police. I'd go to jail and Miles would be gone." My father closed his eyes for a long moment, taking a slow, deep breath. When he opened them, they were clear, focused. "Keep going," the rest poured out in a wretched flood. The demand for my entire paycheck. Darnell taking my bank card on payday, draining the account, handing the cash to his mother. The $75 a week they allowed us for food, transit, daycare, everything. Selling my clothes, buying Miles's from dubious online outlets. The humiliating secret borrowing from coworkers just to buy milk and bread. In the car, they forced me to sell it too, told me to take the first offer. I sold it for $8,000, it was worth 12. Loretta took all of it, called it the first installment for their silence. Where is Darnell in all this? My father's voice was now dangerously calm, like the still surface of frozen lake. A bitter laugh escaped me. "He's her lieutenant. He says I should be grateful they haven't taken Miles, that I need to listen or it'll be worse. He controls my phone, reads my messages. They forbade me from telling anyone. Especially you and Mom. They said if they found out, next time you wouldn't just be assaulted." I leaned forward, lowering my voice to a terrified whisper. "Loretta's brother, Preston, he did time for armed robbery and extortion. It was his people who jumped you. She told me straight out he can fix any problem." I finally broke, covering my face with my hands as the full weight of it crashed down. The fear, the humiliation, the utter helplessness. I cried for the woman I used to be, for the safety my son deserved, for the sheer unfairness of it all. My father didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty platitudes. He just gently stroked my arm, a steady, rhythmic presence waiting for the storm to pass. When my sobs subsided into shaky breaths, I found one more piece of the nightmare to share. They still want the condo, they're pushing harder. Last week, Preston's people were just standing outside Miles's daycare, not doing anything. Just standing there, watching. It was a warning. They told me next time they'd walk right in. My father's hands, still holding mine, were tense. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, the pain raw in his voice. "Why didn't you tell me right away, Amara?" "I was scared, Dad," I pleaded, looking at him through blurry eyes. "They hurt you once. I couldn't risk them doing it again, or worse, hurting Mom or just taking Miles. They have the forged documents, the video, they have people who won't stop. I'm trapped, I don't know what to do." He let go of my hands and stood up abruptly. He walked to the cafe window, his back to me, and stood in silence, looking out at the gray city street. Miles, in his own world, was happily mashing cookie into his face. I stared at my father's rigid back, and a new, sharper fear sliced through me. Confessing hadn't brought relief, it had made the danger real to someone else. What now? What happens when Loretta finds out I talked? My father turned from the window. The man who walked back to the table and sat down wasn't just my dad. His eyes held a chill, a calculating sharpness I'd never seen before. "Amara," he said, his voice unsettlingly calm. "There are some things you don't know about me. What could my quiet, retired father possibly know about handling monsters like Loretta?" The answer, it turned out, was everything. And his first instruction filled me with a new kind of dread. I had to go back and pretend nothing had changed. The man sitting across from me in the cafe booth was my father, but in that moment he was also a stranger. The gentle, retired security consultant was gone, replaced by someone with eyes like flint and a demeanor of absolute, unnerving calm. "What do you mean, Dad?" I asked, my voice still thick from crying. "You know I served 20 years in the army, but you don't know where or in what capacity." He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his gaze locking onto mine. "I was in special operations, Army intelligence, 2 decades of operational work, surveillance, recruitment, threat analysis, neutralizing high-value targets." I stared, my mouth slightly agape. Special operations. Army intelligence. The words belonged to movies, to spy novels, not to my father who loved barbecue Sundays and bad puns. He was the man who taught me to ride a bike, not this. "I didn't quit that line of work after retirement, not really," he continued, his voice low and even. "I consult. I have connections in law enforcement, in federal agencies. I have people who will help if I ask, and I have skills you don't just forget." "Dad, I don't understand." "You will." He didn't blink. "Your mother-in-law and her ex-con brother think they're the smartest people in the room. They think they can blackmail, threaten, and intimidate their way to what they want. They chose the wrong family. They touched my daughter and my grandson. That was their first, last, and biggest mistake." The steel in his voice was real, tangible. It wasn't the bluster of anger, it was the cold certainty of a professional assessing a mission objective. The person across from me wasn't just a protective father, he was a strategist, a weapon, and he was aimed directly at Loretta Jenkins. "What are you going to do?" The question was a whisper. "I'm going to solve this problem permanently, so they never dare to think about you or Miles again, so all their threats turn inward and bury them." He stated it as a simple fact. "But for that I need time, and I need your help, Amara. Your cooperation has to be flawless." A new kind of fear, threaded with a fragile hope, coiled in my stomach. "What kind of help?" "You need to act completely normal. You go back home, you keep handing over the money, you keep enduring the insults. You do not, under any circumstances, show them that you've told me a single thing. Your behavior cannot change one iota. This is critical. They must remain convinced you are broken, silent, and obedient. Do you understand?" The thought of going back into that house, facing Darnell's cold compliance and Loretta's smug dominance, of continuing the charade of defeat, it made my soul shrink. I nodded, though my insides were twisting into knots. "How long?" "A few weeks, maybe a month. I need to gather intelligence, prepare evidence, plan every move down to the second. We cannot rush. If we tip our hand, they'll destroy evidence, lawyer up, or disappear. We strike once with precision and we leave no room for error. And if they find out I talked to you, they won't." His certainty was absolute. "We won't meet in person again. We won't speak on the phone. We'll communicate through a secure messenger app I'm going to install on your phone right now. The messages will delete automatically. There will be no trace, no logs. Even if Darnell checks your phone daily, he won't find it." "Dad, I'm scared." It was the truest thing I'd said. "I know." For a moment the soldier faded and my father looked back at me, his eyes softening. "But you have to trust me. I won't let anyone hurt you. No one will touch you or Miles or your mother, I promise you that. I've handled far bigger threats than a greedy mother-in-law and her two-bit criminal brother. You just have to hold on a little longer." "Can you do that?" I looked over at Miles. He was smiling at me, his face smeared with chocolate and cookie crumbs, utterly innocent of the war being planned around him. I looked back at my father, at the resolute certainty in his eyes. I had no weapons, no plan, no strength left, but he did. I had to borrow his strength. "I can," I said, and the words felt like a vow. "Good girl." He pulled out his phone. "Now listen carefully. This is your first lesson in operational security." For the next 20 minutes my father, Vernon Hayes, former Army intelligence operative, trained me. He installed the encrypted app, showed me how to use it, how to set messages to vanish, how to hide the app's icon in a disguised folder. He gave me pointers on demeanor. "Keep your eyes downcast, speak in monosyllables, flinch slightly when Loretta raises her voice. You are a scared woman who will do anything to protect her child. That is your role, but inside, Amara, remember. This is a temporary game, a performance. It will be over soon." We walked out of the cafe. The frigid air was a shock. He hugged me tightly, then bent and kissed the top of Miles's head. "Hold tight, sweetie," he murmured to my son. "I'm right here even when you can't see me." I watched him walk away, a steady figure disappearing into the city crowd. Then, holding Miles's hand, I turned and walked back toward the subway station. The fear was still there, a living thing in my chest, but for the first time in 2 months it wasn't alone. A tiny, stubborn flame of hope flickered beside it. That same evening in the tidy, quiet condo he shared with my mother, my father became someone else entirely. He went into his home office, locked the door, and pulled an old, leather-bound notebook from a locked drawer. On the first page, he began to write, his handwriting precise and disciplined. He sketched a diagram linking names with lines. He listed known tactics: extortion, forgery, video manipulation, assault, psychological coercion. He noted weaknesses: Loretta's arrogance, Preston's criminal visibility, Darnell's weakness. Then he picked up a burner phone, a relic from his old life. He dialed a number from memory. Solomon, it's Vernon. Yeah, it's been a minute. Listen, I need help. Small, unofficial operation. Surveillance, recording, tech support. Can you do it? A pause, a low chuckle from the other end. Excellent, we'll meet tomorrow. I'll give you the details. He hung up and dialed another and another. By midnight, he had a team of 4. Solomon, a tech wizard who could bug a city. Andre, a surveillance specialist who could follow a ghost. Owen, a forensic analyst now in the private sector. Malcolm, with deep, trusted connections in the police department. All former colleagues, all vetted, all loyal. They asked no questions about payment. This was a favor for a brother, a debt from a past life. The machine was in motion. Phase 1 began the next day. Solomon, after 2 days of observing Loretta's routine, slipped into her condo while she was at her weekly hairdresser appointment. He was in and out in under 15 minutes. Tiny, undetectable microphones were now nestled in her living room lamp and bedroom alarm clock, transmitting every word to a recorder in a neighboring apartment Vernon had quietly rented. Andre started tailing Preston. He documented the ex-con's movements, his visits to a dingy bar, his meetings with rough-looking men, his routines. Photos, time-stamped videos, license plate numbers. A profile was building. Meanwhile, I was back in the lion's den. That night, Darnell took my phone as usual. Long day? He asked, his eyes scanning my face. Just tired, I mumbled, looking at the floor. Miles was fussy. He grunted, scrolling through my call log and texts, finding nothing. He handed it back, satisfied. Inside, my heart hammered against my ribs. The secret app felt like a bomb in my pocket. A week later, I received my first secure message just as I was about to hand my paycheck over to Darnell. It was a single, coded sentence from my father. Package is green. Proceed as usual. I didn't know what it meant, but I obeyed. Darnell took my bank card, withdrew every cent of my $1,500 paycheck, and as instructed, handed the cash to Loretta during her next visit. She counted it with a satisfied smirk. Good girl, Amara, she purred, patting my cheek like I was a dog. See how much smoother things are when you listen? Soon you'll sign the condo papers and all this unpleasantness will be over. You can live in peace. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I nodded, eyes down, playing my part. Just a performance, I chanted in my head. A temporary game. What I didn't know was that the money I just handed over, every bill was specially marked. Vernon, using his intelligence contacts, had accessed a batch of logged bills. Their serial numbers were in a database. They were the first tangible thread linking Loretta and her brother to their crime. As Loretta tucked the money into her purse, miles away, my father was coordinating phase 2. It was time to make the enemy feel safe, to let their arrogance bloom. He checked himself into the hospital, Solomon's doctor contact providing the necessary cover. The diagnosis, a mild heart attack. It was entered into the system. Wires were taped to his chest. He looked the part. The news traveled fast. Darnell, playing the concerned son-in-law, called to check on him, and of course he told his mother. Vernon, lying in his hospital bed with headphones on, listened to the live feed from Loretta's bugged condo. He heard her reaction to the news. His heart, at his age, I'm not surprised. Loretta's voice came through, crisp and cold. Preston's rougher tone chimed in. Maybe he'll clock out on his own, save us the trouble. One less problem, Loretta agreed. A pause, the sound of a lighter clicking. The main thing is Amara doesn't get any ideas now. Who's she gonna tell? Her dad's in the hospital, her husband's on our side. We got the evidence, she's not going anywhere. Vernon allowed himself a small, cold smile as he removed the headphones. Complacent, overconfident, perfect. Listening to Loretta celebrate his potential demise, my father's plan locked into its next phase. But he needed a crack in their unity, a weak link to exploit. His focus shifted to my husband, Darnell, the puppet who carried out his mother's cruelty. Vernon knew how to break a target, not with fists but with truth. Meanwhile, I had to face a new level of terror. Loretta, emboldened by my father's illness, decided the time for waiting was over. She delivered an ultimatum. Sign the condo over in 48 hours, or the video would be sent to CPS. The performance was about to become a nightmare, and I wasn't sure I could hold my nerve. The hospital walls were a sterile white, but the operation unfolding within them was anything but clean. My father, Vernon, listened to the recording of Loretta and Preston's callous conversation about his health, his expression unreadable. Emotions were a liability in fieldwork. The satisfaction he felt was purely tactical. The targets were behaving predictably, their overconfidence a vulnerability he could exploit. He turned his attention to the dossier on Darnell. The psychological profile was clear. Not a born villain, but a weak-willed man, emotionally stunted and dominated by a narcissistic mother. His compliance was born from fear and a twisted desire for approval, not innate cruelty. He was the perfect candidate for recruitment, or in less polite terms, for flipping. Malcolm, Vernon spoke into his secure phone, I need a soft approach on Darnell Jenkins. Set up a meet through that therapist he saw last year. Make it seem psychological, non-threatening, I'll handle the rest. While my father plotted, I was living in a tightening vice. Loretta, buoyed by the news of my father's heart attack, decided to capitalize on what she saw as my maximum vulnerability. She came to the house unannounced, Preston looming in the hallway behind her. She didn't bother with her usual faux pleasantries. The waiting game is over, Amara, she declared, dropping a thick envelope onto our coffee table. The transfer papers for the condo, all drawn up nice and legal. My breath caught. I need to think you've thought enough. Her voice was a whip crack. You have 48 hours, sign them. We meet at the attorney's office Friday at 2 p.m. You bring the original deed. Darnell stood by the window, silent, a statue of shame and compliance. And if I don't? The question left my lips before I could stop it, a final, feeble spark of defiance. Loretta's smile was a grimace. She nodded to Preston, who pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and held it up. It was the daycare, Miles's daycare, on a live feed from the street. A man I didn't recognize, built like a refrigerator, was leaning against a car across the street, staring directly at the entrance. My brother's associate, Loretta said sweetly. He's just keeping an eye on things. If you're not at that attorney's office, signed papers in hand, he won't just be watching from the outside next time. And that video of you abusing Miles, it'll be in the inbox of every CPS worker in the district before the clock strikes 3. You'll never see your son again. The threat was so blunt, so evil, it sucked the air from the room. The performance almost shattered. I wanted to scream, to launch myself at her, but my father's training echoed in my head. They must be convinced you are broken. I let my shoulders slump further. I let a tear trace down my cheek. This one at least was real. I looked at Darnell, pleading silently for an intervention that I knew would never come. He looked away. I understand, I whispered, the picture of defeated acquiescence. Good. Loretta patted the envelope. 48 hours, dear, don't be late. They left, leaving a vacuum of dread in their wake. The moment the door clicked shut, I ran to the bathroom and dry heaved over the toilet, trembling uncontrollably. 48 hours, it felt like a death sentence. Later that night, a secure message flashed on my hidden app. It was my father. Pressure expected, hold line, package delivery imminent, acknowledge. I typed back, fingers shaking. Pressure critical, deadline 48H, acknowledged. I had no idea what package delivery meant, but I clung to it like a lifeline. The package delivery was my father, discharged from the hospital but playing the part of a convalescing old man. He arranged, through Malcolm's therapist contact, a meeting with Darnell. The setup was perfect. A neutral coffee shop, the premise a follow-up about past stress. Darnell, always susceptible to authority figures, agreed. Vernon arrived first, choosing a corner booth shrouded in shadow. When Darnell walked in and saw him, he stopped dead, his face bleaching of color. You're supposed to be in the hospital, Darnell stammered. Sit down, Darnell. Vernon's voice held no room for argument. It was the voice of a commander, not a father-in-law. Darnell sat, nervously glancing around as if expecting Loretta to materialize. Listen to me very carefully, Vernon began, placing a tablet on the table between them. I know everything. The threats, the blackmail, the forged documents, the edited video, all of it, and I have proof. He tapped the screen. Loretta's voice, clear and venomous, filled the space between them. That little fool thinks she can refuse me. I'll squeeze her so hard she'll sign that condo over on her knees. Preston's voice, we should scare her one more time, make it clear this is serious. Darnell's face crumpled. That's not what you think, be quiet, Vernon cut him off, his tone icy. Keep listening. The next clip played, Loretta again laughing. Darnell is such a doormat. I tell him jump, he asks how high. We broke Amara too. We'll get the condo soon, sell it, split the money. Of course, we won't give Darnell anything. What does he need it for? He's useless anyway. The color that returned to Darnell's face was a deep, mortified red. He covered his eyes with his hand, as if to block out the sound of his mother's contempt. Do you understand now? Vernon's voice was quieter but no less sharp. You are a tool to her, a useful idiot. You are helping her destroy your own family, terrorize your wife, and steal from your son, all for a woman who laughs at you and plans to cut you out completely. I thought it was for the family, Darnell choked out, the pathetic justification sounding hollow even to him. What family? Vernon leaned forward, his gaze piercing. You turned your wife into a slave. You are an accomplice to extortion, assault, and fraud. You are a criminal, Darnell. The police already have Preston. They have the marked money you helped pass to him. Darnell's head snapped up. Marked money? Every bill from Amara's last paycheck, serial numbers logged, found in your uncle's apartment during a police search this morning. The news hit Darnell like a physical blow. He hadn't known about the search. He'd been kept in the dark just like always. You have a choice, Vernon said, shifting into the recruitment phase. His voice lost some of its ice, adopting a tone of pragmatic offering. You can keep following your mother down this path and find yourself in a courtroom, facing years in prison alongside her. Or you can walk out of this. You can give testimony. You can help us gather the final evidence. If you do, I will personally ensure the prosecutor understands your cooperation. You have a chance to stay out of jail and maybe, just maybe, salvage some future relationship with your son. The offer hung in the air. Darnell stared at the table, his mind racing. Vernon saw the conflict, the lifelong programming to obey his mother warring with the instinct for self-preservation and the dawning horror at what he'd done. And if I refuse, Darnell whispered, then I hand everything, these recordings, the financial forensics, the marked money trail, witness statements to the authorities. Your mother goes down for a long time. Preston goes down for longer, and you go down with them. Amara will get a divorce and full custody. You'll see Miles through plexiglass during visiting hours at a state correctional facility. The choice is yours. The silence stretched. Vernon didn't push. He let the weight of the decision crush down on Darnell. He was applying precisely calibrated pressure to the weakest point. Finally, Darnell's shoulders sagged in utter defeat. What do you need from me? Your text messages with your mother. Every discussion about the plans, the threats, the money. Access to any documents she's hidden. Your sworn testimony detailing everything from the beginning. And most importantly, you keep acting normal. She must suspect nothing until the very end. She'll know, Darnell said, fear returning to his eyes. She always knows. Not this time, Vernon said with finality. This time we're smarter. That evening, via the secure app, my father sent me a simple message. Asset secured, proceed with deadline, trust the plan. Asset secured, he'd flipped Darnell. The knowledge was a seismic shift. The enemy camp was breached. When Darnell came home that night, he was pale and withdrawn. He didn't touch my phone, he barely looked at me. I told her you'd be there Friday, he mumbled. She's bringing Solomon to make sure you don't back out. Solomon, the enforcer. The message was clear. Physical intimidation was now part of the script. I'll be there, I whispered, the perfect picture of terrified resignation. But inside, the flicker of hope grew stronger. My father had turned my husband. The trap was being set, and Loretta, in her arrogance, was walking right into it, bringing her own muscle to witness her downfall. With Darnell now secretly on our side, the plan accelerated. But Loretta, smelling victory, was becoming more dangerous and unpredictable. The stage was set for the final confrontation at the attorney's office, but nothing was guaranteed. Solomon, the hired enforcer, was a wild card, and a desperate Loretta was capable of anything. My father's voice echoed in my head, trust the plan. But as I dressed Miles for what felt like a trip to the gallows, I couldn't silence the question. What if the plan wasn't enough? What if in that office the performance ended and the real nightmare began? The 48-hour deadline pulsed in my skull like a second heartbeat. Every tick of the clock, every chime from the grandfather clock in the living room was a hammer blow. I moved through the apartment in a fog of terror, mechanically feeding Miles, changing him, holding him a little too tightly. He'd squirm and ask, "Mommy, too tight," and I'd loosen my grip, whispering apologies into his hair. Darnell was a ghost haunting our home. He'd given his testimony, he'd handed over the damning text messages, but the act had hollowed him out. He jumped at every notification on his phone, terrified it was his mother. He avoided my eyes, steeped in a shame so profound it was almost a physical presence. He was the ultimate double agent, and the strain was cracking him. My only tether to sanity was the secure app. My father's messages were infrequent, precise, and lifeline strong. Phase 2 complete. Asset secured. Proceed as directed at 48-hour mark. We are in position. We, the word was a blanket. It meant my father wasn't acting alone. There was a team, the ghosts in the surveillance van, the eyes on Preston, the tech wizard who'd bugged Loretta's condo. I wasn't one scared woman against a Gorgon and her ogre brother. I was part of a unit. The night before the deadline, I couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., a new message appeared. It wasn't from my father's usual code. It was a string of numbers: 23 Garden Street, 2 p.m., Victoria and Associates, attorney Alina Victoria, confirm receipt. I typed back, my fingers clumsy with fatigue and fear. Received. The reply was immediate: courage. Remember your role, broken bird. We catch her in flight. Broken bird, that was my part. The wounded creature too terrified to fight. I practiced in the mirror, letting my shoulders slump, making my eyes wide and vacant. I thought of the $75 grocery runs, the hollow hunger, the sound of Loretta's laugh. The fear came easily. The performance was just truth dialed up. The morning of the meeting, I dressed with deliberate care in my most worn-out clothes, faded jeans, a sweater with a frayed cuff. I wanted to look the part of the destitute, pressured woman. Miles, oblivious in his adorable overalls, was my only spot of brightness. Darnell drove us in silence. The air in the car was thick enough to choke on. As we turned onto Garden Street, I saw her. Loretta, standing on the steps of a modest brick building like a queen on a dais, and beside her Solomon. My blood ran cold. He was bigger than I remembered from the attorney's office, a wall of muscle packed into a black tactical jacket. A fresh, angry scar cut through his eyebrow. His eyes, flat and predatory, locked onto me the moment I stepped out of the car. They swept over me, over Miles, a quick threat assessment. I instinctively pulled Miles closer, tucking his face against my neck. Right on time, Loretta chirped, her voice dripping with a victor's condescension. She didn't even glance at Darnell. Her prize was in my hands, the folder containing my grandmother's deed. You have everything? I nodded, unable to speak, holding up the folder. My hand shook. It wasn't an act. Good girl, she turned, Solomon falling into step behind us. His proximity was a physical pressure, a wall at my back pushing me forward. I could smell stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne on him. Every nerve ending screamed. The office of Alina Victoria was a study in quiet professionalism. Soft carpet, dark wood, the faint scent of lemon polish. Miss Victoria herself was a surprise. I'd expected a stern, elderly matron. She was perhaps in her late 40s, with intelligent, calm eyes behind stylish glasses and a streak of silver in her auburn hair. Her gaze met mine as we entered, and for a fraction of a second, it wasn't the blank look of a stranger. It was a look of recognition, of readiness. She was part of the we. My father's planning was immaculate. He hadn't just found an attorney, he'd recruited one. Please sit, Miss Victoria said, her voice cool and composed. She directed us to chairs arranged in front of her large desk. Loretta took the central one, claiming dominance. I perched on the edge of mine, pulling Miles onto my lap, a human shield. Solomon took up a post against the wall behind Loretta, arms crossed, a silent monument to consequence. Darnell lingered near the door, a shadow. So we are here to execute a transfer of deed for the condominium at 1424 Elm Street from Amara Hayes to Darnell Jenkins, is that correct? Miss Victoria began, opening a file with deliberate slowness. That is correct, Loretta answered, her tone implying the attorney was slow. I need to hear from Mrs. Hayes, Miss Victoria said, turning her steady gaze on me. Amara, is this your understanding? I felt Solomon's eyes on the side of my face. I looked down at Miles, who was fiddling with a button on my sweater. Yes, I whispered, the word barely audible. And is this transaction your voluntary act? Are you entering into this agreement of your own free will without any pressure or coercion? The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. This was the crucible, the question was the bait. Loretta had to take it, she did. For heaven's sake, Loretta snapped, her patience evaporating. This is a family matter, she's doing what's best for her child's future. Can we please move this along? Some of us have busy schedules. Her voice was sharp, edged with the arrogance of someone who believed the law was a mere formality she had already circumvented. Miss Victoria didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on me, a lighthouse in my panic. Amara, I need a clear answer. Are you being threatened? I let the silence stretch. I let the terror show. I looked from Miss Victoria to Loretta, then let my eyes flicker, terrified, towards Solomon. I hugged Miles tighter. I want to do what's right for my son. My voice broke on the last word, a perfect crack of maternal despair. It was the answer of a coerced woman, and it ignited Loretta's fury. What's right is signing that paper and ending this ridiculous charade. she hissed, leaning forward, her veneer of civility shattering. "We are done waiting. We are done with your sniveling hesitation. You will sign that paper, Amara, or so help me, Miss Jenkins." Miss Victoria's voice cut through the air like a whip. She stood, her presence suddenly commanding. "You will control yourself. This is my office." But Loretta was past listening. She was at the pinnacle of her scheme, the condo inches from her grasp, and this delay, this questioning, was an intolerable insult. She turned on me, her face a mask of naked malice. "You sign it, you ungrateful little bitch, or I swear to God, your father won't leave that hospital alive, and your son will be in the system before you can blink. Do you understand me?" The threat, explicit and venomous, hung in the air. It was everything my father had hoped for. A recorded, witnessed, unambiguous act of coercion. Solomon, responding to Loretta's rage, pushed off the wall, taking one menacing step toward the desk. Miss Victoria didn't back down. She pointed at him. "You step back now." It was the moment. The trap sprung, the door to the office flew open. It wasn't a secretary, it was Detective Miller, the man from my father's hospital room, flanked by two plainclothes officers and two in uniform. They moved with a swift, silent efficiency that spoke of perfect timing. "Loretta Jenkins," Detective Miller announced, his voice filling the room. "You are under arrest for extortion, conspiracy to commit fraud, and making criminal threats." He turned his steely gaze to the mountain of a man. "Solomon Graves, arrest for complicity and witness intimidation." The transformation on Loretta's face was a grotesque masterpiece. Triumph melted into confusion, then hardened into sheer, incandescent rage. "What is this?" "This is a setup, a family dispute. You have no right." One of the plainclothes officers held up a small digital recorder. He pressed play. "You sign it, or I swear to God, your father won't leave that hospital alive, and your son will be in the system before you can blink." Loretta's own voice, crystalline in its hatred, echoed in the quiet office. Her jaw went slack, the blood drained from her face. Her eyes darted to Darnell, who had shrunk into the corner, his face a parchment of guilt and relief. Darnell, the name was a strangled accusation. He couldn't meet her eyes. He looked at the floor and gave the smallest, most definitive nod. The betrayal detonated within her. You did this, you pathetic, spineless." The officers were on her, gently but firmly securing her hands behind her back. The snick of the handcuffs was the most beautiful, final sound I had ever heard. Solomon, with a surprising lack of resistance, submitted to the same fate, his cold eyes finally showing a flicker of something, futility perhaps. As they were let out, Loretta twisted in the officer's grip, her eyes finding mine. They blazed with a hatred so pure it seemed it would scorch the air between us. "This isn't over, you hear me? You think you've won." "This isn't." The door closed, cutting off her scream. The sudden silence was a physical thing, heavy and profound. Miles, startled by the shouting, began to cry, soft, confused sobs against my shoulder. I held him, my own body trembling uncontrollably, a marionette with its strings cut. Miss Victoria let out a long, slow breath, the tension leaving her shoulders. "Mrs. Hayes. Are you all right?" Before I could form a word, the door opened again. My father walked in. He wasn't in a hospital gown. He was dressed in dark trousers and a sweater, his posture erect, his eyes clear and scanning the room before settling on me. In two strides he was at my side, his large, warm hand coming to rest on my shaking shoulder. "It's done, sweetheart," he said, his voice low and sure, a bedrock in the shifting world. "The hard part is over." I looked up at him, at this man who had been a quiet retiree, a loving grandpa, and now was revealed as a strategist, a commander, my protector. The tears that came then weren't from fear. They were from the sheer, overwhelming flood of relief. The trap had closed, the monster was caught, and for the first time in 2 long, terrible months I could finally breathe. The cuffs were on, but the war wasn't over. In the stark fluorescent light of the police precinct, a new battle began, the battle of paperwork, testimony, and the cold mechanics of justice. Loretta, from behind bars, was already spinning a web of lies, painting herself as the victim of a vindictive daughter-in-law. The forged documents and edited video still existed, potential weapons if the case faltered. My father assured me the operation was airtight, but as I sat in a hard plastic chair, repeating my nightmare to a stone-faced detective, a sliver of doubt wormed its way in. Had we truly captured the beast, or had we merely cornered it, making it more desperate and dangerous than ever? The morning of the meeting dawned gray and brittle, mirroring the shard of ice lodged in my chest. I dressed Miles in his best clothes, a ridiculous, heartbreaking gesture. For his last day with his mother, a morbid part of my brain whispered. I silenced it. Trust the plan. My father's final message had been brief. All teams green. Execute roll, we are there. It was everything and nothing. Darnell was a silent ghost in the apartment, moving with a jittery tension. He knew the script, but the weight of his betrayal to his mother, to his old self, was crushing him. She's already at the attorney's, he muttered, checking his phone. Solomon is with her, they're eager. The word made my skin crawl. I just nodded, unable to speak. We drove in suffocating silence. Every red light felt like a reprieve, every green light a step toward the abyss. The attorney's office was in a modest brick building on Garden Street. As we pulled up, I saw her. Loretta standing on the steps like a queen awaiting tribute. Beside her, Solomon was an immovable mountain of muscle and menace, his shaved head and scarred cheek turned toward us. His eyes, cold and assessing, tracked my every move as I got out of the car and lifted Miles from his seat. Right on time, Loretta said, her smile triumphant. She didn't even glance at Darnell. You have the documents. I held up the folder containing my grandmother's deed, my hand trembling authentically. Good, let's not waste any more of my day. She turned and led the way inside, Solomon falling into step behind me, his presence a palpable pressure on my back. The office of Miss Victoria, the attorney, was deceptively calm. Soft lighting, shelves of leather-bound books, a large mahogany desk. Miss Victoria herself was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense bun. She greeted us with professional detachment, but when her gaze met mine for a split second, I saw a flash of something else. Readiness. Please sit, she said, gesturing to the chairs arranged before her desk. Loretta took the central one, claiming authority. I sat on the edge of mine, clutching Miles on my lap. Solomon positioned himself against the wall behind Loretta, arms crossed, a silent sentinel of threat. Darnell hovered near the door. So we are here to execute a transfer of deed for the property at 1424 Elm Street, from Amara Hayes to Darnell Jenkins, is that correct? Miss Victoria began, opening a file. That is correct, Loretta answered for me. I need to hear from Mrs. Hayes, the attorney said firmly, her eyes on me. Amara, is this your understanding? I swallowed, my throat dry as dust. Yes, I whispered. And is this transaction your voluntary act? Are you entering into this agreement of your own free will without any pressure or coercion? The room seemed to shrink. I felt Solomon's stare boring into the side of my head. Loretta's smile tightened. It's for the best, I stammered, the scripted line of a broken woman. That's not what I asked, Miss Victoria pressed, her voice gentle but relentless. She was playing her part perfectly, creating the record. Are you being threatened in any way to sign these papers? Loretta could no longer contain herself. For God's sake, of course she's not threatened, it's a family matter. She wants to secure the asset for her husband and child. Now can we please move this along? Some of us have busy schedules. Her impatience was a live wire. Miss Victoria ignored her, keeping her focus on me. Amara. I need a clear answer. I looked down at Miles, who was playing with a button on my coat. I let a tear fall, a real one born of sheer terror and the enormity of the moment. I want to do what's right for my son. It was the perfect, ambiguous answer of a coerced victim, Loretta scoffed. There, you have your answer, now the papers. Miss Victoria, with deliberate slowness, laid out the transfer documents. They looked officious and final. She pointed to 3 signature lines. You need to sign here, here, and here, Mrs. Hayes. Once you do, the process is irreversible. Do you understand? I nodded, picking up the pen she offered. It felt like it weighed 100 pounds. My hand shook violently as I scrawled my name on the first line. The scratch of the pen was deafening. I moved to the second line, signed again, my vision blurred. I hovered over the third and final signature. This was it, the point of no return in Loretta's eyes, the culmination of her scheme. I hesitated, letting the pen tremble above the paper. The performance had to be perfect. What now? Loretta snapped, leaning forward. Sign it. I looked up, tears streaming freely now. I can't. It's my grandmother's, Loretta exploded. She shot to her feet, her chair screeching back. You listen to me, you ungrateful little bitch. After everything we've done for you, you back out now? She slammed her hand on the desk, making Miles jump and whimper. You sign that paper, or I swear to God, your father won't make it out of that hospital and your son will be in foster care by nightfall. Do you understand me? Solomon pushed off the wall, taking one menacing step toward the desk. Miss Jenkins, Miss Victoria stood, her voice ringing with authority. You will control yourself and you, she pointed at Solomon, will step back or I will call security this instant. Call them, Loretta shrieked, past all caution, drunk on her imagined power. It won't change a thing, she's signing, Solomon, make her understand. In that moment of chaos, as Solomon took another step and Loretta's threats hung in the air, the office door flew open. It wasn't security. It was the detective Vernon had worked with, flanked by two plainclothes officers and two in uniform. They moved with a swift, practiced efficiency. Loretta Jenkins, the detective announced, his badge held high. Major Crimes Unit. You are under arrest for extortion, conspiracy to commit fraud, and coercion. He turned to the mountain of a man. Solomon Graves, arrest for complicity and witness intimidation. The triumph on Loretta's face melted into sheer, uncomprehending shock. What? This is a mistake. This is my daughter-in-law. We're handling a private family matter. The detective nodded to one of the plainclothes officers who held up a small digital recorder. He pressed play. You sign that paper or I swear to God your father won't make it out of that hospital and your son will be in foster care by nightfall. Loretta's own voice, venomous and clear, filled the room. Her face went slack. She looked at Darnell, who had shrunk into the corner, his face ashen. Darnell, what is this? Darnell lifted his gaze, a mixture of shame and desperate relief in his eyes. It's over, Mom. I told them everything. The word mom seemed to detonate in her. Betrayal from her most controlled pawn, her composure shattered completely. You did this, you weak, sniveling. The officers were on her, gently but firmly pulling her arms behind her back. The metallic click of the handcuffs was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Solomon, with a surprising lack of fight, submitted to being cuffed, his eyes fixed on the floor. As they were let out, Loretta twisted, her eyes finding mine, blazing with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. This isn't over, Amara, you hear me? This isn't. The door closed, cutting off her threat. The sudden silence in the office was overwhelming. Miles began to cry softly, burying his face in my neck. I held him, my own body trembling with the aftershocks. Miss Victoria let out a long breath. Mrs. Hayes, are you all right? Before I could answer, the door opened again. My father walked in. He didn't look like a convalescent anymore. He stood straight, his eyes clear and alert, scanning the room before settling on me. In 2 strides he was beside me, his hand on my shoulder, a solid, grounding weight. It's done, sweetheart, he said quietly. The hard part is over. The detective approached. Amara will need you to come down to the precinct to give a formal statement. And Mr. Jenkins, he looked at Darnell, your cooperation will be noted, but we'll need your full testimony as well. Darnell just nodded, looking hollowed out. I stood on legs of jelly, still clutching Miles. My father's arm went around me. As we walked out of the office, past the now empty waiting room, I saw a familiar car parked across the street. Andre gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod from the driver's seat. The team had been there, watching, ready. We had never been alone. The bright, cold sunlight of the free world hit my face. Loretta was gone, stuffed into the back of a police car. The vice that had been crushing my life for 2 months was finally, irrevocably broken. The cuffs were on, but the battle wasn't won. At the precinct, a new kind of ordeal began, hours of statements, evidence review, and the cold, hard machinery of justice. Loretta, from her holding cell, was already scheming, demanding a lawyer and spinning lies. The forged documents and edited video were still out there, potential weapons if the case faltered. My father assured me the operation was airtight, but as the police asked me to relive every humiliating detail, doubt crept in. Had we really trapped the monster, or had we just made her more dangerous? The precinct was a whirlwind of harsh lights, ringing phones, and low, serious voices. It was a different kind of battlefield. While my father coordinated silently with the detective, I was ushered into a small, sterile interview room with a kind-faced female officer. For the next several hours, I poured out the entire story again, this time for the official record. Every withheld paycheck, every sneering insult from Loretta, every terrified glance at the man outside the daycare. The feeling of Darnell taking my phone from my hands. It was draining, reliving the nightmare in vivid detail, but with each sentence I felt a piece of the poison leaving my system. They showed me the evidence my father's team had gathered. Seeing the forensic report that detailed the document forgery, the pixelated inconsistencies, the signature misalignments, was a visceral relief. The technical analysis of the video, explaining the jump cuts and audio splices, transformed it from a terrifying threat into a pathetic fabrication. The police had also executed a search warrant on Loretta's condo, seizing her computer and financial records. The marked bills from my paycheck were logged into evidence, a direct chain from me to her to Preston. Darnell was in another room, giving his own statement. His cooperation was thorough if shamed. He provided the text messages, confirmed the threats, and outlined the financial coercion. His testimony was the mortar that held the bricks of evidence together. My father moved through the precinct with a quiet authority. He wasn't just a victim's relative. He was a respected consultant providing crucial intelligence. I saw the detective defer to him on points of procedure, asking, "Vernon, how do you want this entered?" It was a glimpse into the man he had been, the professional who commanded respect in rooms like this. After what felt like an eternity, we were told we could go home. Loretta and Solomon were being held without bail, given the severity of the charges and the evidence of witness intimidation. Preston, already in custody on the marked money charge, was now looking at additional conspiracy counts. The district attorney is already reviewing the case, the detective told us as we stood to leave. It's solid. With the recordings from the attorney's office and the financial forensics, they're looking at significant prison time. The restraining orders will be filed first thing tomorrow. The word home had never sounded so strange. The apartment I returned to with Miles was the same physical space, but the atmosphere had been transformed. The oppressive dread was gone, replaced by a shaky, overwhelming emptiness. It was the silence after a long, violent storm. The first night was the hardest. Every creak of the building made me jump. I checked the locks on the doors 3 times. Miles, sensing the shift, was clingy and fussy. I held him all night, not from fear now, but from a desperate, grateful love. We were safe. The concept was so foreign it took time to settle in. The legal machinery ground forward with surprising speed, a testament to the cleanliness of my father's operation. The DA presented with the packaged evidence. The recordings, the forged documents analysis, the marked money, Darnell's testimony fast-tracked the case. Loretta and Preston, through court-appointed lawyers, initially blustered about false accusations and family disputes. But when the prosecution played the audio from the bugged condo in the attorney's office and laid out the forensic proof, their defiance crumbled. Facing decades in prison, they took plea deals. Loretta Jenkins pleaded guilty to felony extortion, forgery, and conspiracy. She was sentenced to 5 years in state prison, with a long probation term to follow. A permanent restraining order barred her from contacting me, Miles, or my parents. Preston, with his prior record, fared worse. He got 8 years for extortion, assault, and witness intimidation, to be served in a maximum security facility. Solomon, the enforcer, received a shorter sentence for intimidation and acting as an accessory, his cooperation in identifying other minor players earning him a slight reduction. The news was delivered to me in my father's living room. He read the formal verdict from his tablet, his voice neutral. When he finished, he looked at me. "It's done." I expected to feel jubilation, a victorious shout. Instead, I felt a profound, bone-deep weariness, followed by a slow, spreading warmth of relief. It was truly finally over. My life began the arduous process of rebuilding. The first step was dealing with Darnell. He moved out of our apartment the day after the arrests. The divorce proceedings were swift and uncontested. He didn't fight for custody, didn't dispute the division of assets. He signed everything, his signature a symbol of his surrender. The only thing he asked for through his lawyer was the possibility of visitation with Miles. I wrestled with it. The man had been my jailer as much as his mother. But I also remembered the broken man in the coffee shop, the one who had finally chosen his son. And my father's counsel, the boy shouldn't be a weapon. If Darnell is genuinely remorseful and poses no threat, supervised visits could be a path for Miles to know his father on your terms. I agreed to strictly supervised once-weekly visits with my father present as the supervisor. It was a concession not for Darnell but for my son, who sometimes still asked for daddy. My professional life was the next frontier. I had to go back to work and face the colleagues I'd borrowed money from, the managers who had seen my performance dip. I drafted my resignation letter, ready to escape the shame, but before I could send it, I was called into the CEO's office. To my shock, it wasn't just him. The head of HR and the general counsel were there too. My heart sank, expecting termination. "Amara, please sit down," the CEO said, his expression grave but not unkind. "We've been contacted by the district attorney's office regarding your situation. We've seen the forensic report on the forged documents that were attributed to you." He slid a copy of the report across the desk. "On behalf of the entire company, I want to offer you our most sincere apology. What you endured was horrific. And the fact that our internal systems were exploited to facilitate part of it is something we are taking very seriously. Your position here is not only secure, but the board has approved a promotion to head of the new client analytics division. There's also a substantial compensation adjustment, effective immediately, for the distress and professional harm you suffered." I was speechless. The promotion was a real challenging position with a salary that nearly doubled my old one. The raise was life-changing. It wasn't pity, it was restitution, and it gave me back my professional dignity in one sweeping gesture. With the new income, I could finally breathe. I moved out of the apartment that held so many bad memories and rented a bright three-bedroom place in a family-friendly neighborhood with a good school district. I bought a safe, reliable car. I put my grandmother's condo on the rental market where it now provided a steady stream of passive income. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was building a future. Miles thrived in the stability. The shadows lifted from his eyes. He made friends at his new preschool, joined a soccer team for toddlers, and his laughter once again became the soundtrack of my life. My father was a constant, steady presence. He never spoke of the operation again unless I asked. He was just Grandpa who came for dinner, helped with homework, and took Miles on adventures to the museum. But sometimes I'd catch him looking at us, at me smiling, at Miles giggling, and a deep, quiet satisfaction would settle on his face. This had been his most important mission, and it was a success. One evening, about 6 months after the sentencing, as we washed dishes after dinner at my new place, I finally asked the question that had been simmering. Dad, when you were planning everything, weren't you ever afraid it wouldn't work? That something would go wrong? He dried a plate slowly, methodically. Fear is data, Amara. It tells you what's at stake. You don't ignore it, you use it to check your plan. Was I afraid? Yes, I was afraid for you every second, but the plan was sound. The team was good, and the target was arrogant. In our line of work, arrogance is the flaw you pray for. He put the plate away and turned to me, leaning against the counter. The real victory wasn't putting Loretta away. It was seeing you get your life back, seeing you stand tall again. That's the objective that mattered. And I was standing tall. The gaunt, trembling woman on the subway platform was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had looked into the abyss and with help had climbed out. The nightmare was receding, becoming a bad memory, a story with an ending. I was free. Life settled into a peaceful, happy rhythm. Miles was thriving, my career was soaring, and the past felt firmly behind us. Then, a year to the day after the sentencing, an email arrived from Loretta Jenkins's attorney. She was dying. Inoperable cancer, diagnosed in prison. She had weeks to live and was requesting a final meeting. To apologize, she said. My father advised caution, but the request wormed its way into my mind. Could I face the architect of my nightmare one last time? Did I need to truly be free? Or was this her final, twisted attempt at manipulation from beyond the grave? The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, an ordinary day until it wasn't. The subject line was stark. Regarding Loretta Jenkins. My blood, which had run warm and steady for a year, turned to ice water. I almost deleted it unread, a reflex born of self-preservation. But curiosity, or perhaps a morbid need for finality, made me click. Miss Hayes, I am writing to you as the former legal representative of Loretta Jenkins. I am no longer officially retained, but I am acting as an intermediary at her urgent request. Miss Jenkins is currently in the prison infirmary. She has been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It is inoperable. Her prognosis is measured in weeks. She has expressed a deep desire to speak with you one final time. She claims her intentions are to offer a sincere apology and to provide you with information she says you deserve to have. She understands you have no reason to trust her, but she is insistent. She proposes a supervised meeting at the prison visitation center. I would be present, as could any individual of your choosing, for security. There would be no physical contact, and guards would be stationed immediately outside. This is, of course, entirely your decision. I am merely conveying the message. Please take your time to consider, but I would ask for a response within the next few days, given the circumstances. Sincerely, Nicholas Sargent-esque. I read it 3 times, then printed it and drove straight to my father's condo. I handed him the paper without a word. He read it, his face impassive. When he finished, he placed it neatly on his coffee table and looked out the window for a long moment. Cancer, he finally said, the word hanging in the quiet room. I'd heard she'd had some medical issues. They moved her to the infirmary block a month ago. You knew? I asked, surprised. I keep tabs, he said simply. It's habit and prudent. He turned to me. What do you feel? I don't know, I admitted, sinking into his armchair. Angry that she's trying to intrude again, sad in a weird, abstract way, curious. Mostly I feel like this is a trap, a last trick. It very well could be, he nodded. A final manipulation to gain some measure of control, to upset your peace. The information you deserve could be another lie or a poisoned truth designed to hurt you. He paused. Or, facing the end, she might actually be remorseful. Not for your sake, but for her own soul. Prison and a terminal diagnosis have a way of forcing introspection even on the most stubborn. Should I go? I can't answer that. This isn't an operational decision. This is a personal one. You have to ask yourself, will seeing her give you something? Closure? The satisfaction of seeing her diminished? Or will it rip open wounds that are finally healing? He leaned forward. If you decide to go, I will be there. Not in the room if you don't want me, but in the building. And we will have a panic protocol. One word and it ends. I thought about it for 2 days. I thought about the woman who had stolen my peace, who had threatened my child. I thought about the pathetic, hunched figure I'd last seen being led away in cuffs. I thought about Miles, who never asked about her anymore. Mostly, I thought about the version of myself that still sometimes flinched at a loud noise, that occasionally woke in a cold sweat. Did that woman need to see the monster defeated once and for all? On the third day, I emailed the lawyer back. I will meet her. This Saturday, 10 a.m. My father will accompany me to the facility. The prison was a bleak, sprawling complex of concrete and razor wire on the edge of the city. The visiting center was a separate, slightly less grim building. My father parked the car and turned to me. Remember the signal. If you say I'd like some water, I come in immediately and we leave. No questions. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Inside, we cleared security. Attorney Sergeant was waiting, looking older and more tired than I remembered. Miss Hayes, Mr. Hayes, thank you for coming. She's already in the visitation room. It's a private room, given her condition. There's a glass partition, you'll speak through phones. He led us down a sterile hallway to a solid metal door. My father gave my shoulder a firm squeeze and took up a post against the wall opposite the door, a silent sentinel. I took a deep breath and walked in. The room was small and cold. A single chair faced a thick pane of plexiglass. On the other side, in a wheelchair, sat Loretta Jenkins. The transformation was shocking. The woman who had once been all sharp angles and predatory poise was gone. She was shrunken, swallowed by a drab prison sweatshirt. Her skin was a sickly yellow, stretched taut over brittle-looking bones. An IV pole stood next to her chair, a clear tube snaking under her sleeve. But her eyes, though sunken, still held a flicker of their old sharpness. She picked up the phone on her side. Slowly, I picked up mine. We stared at each other through the glass for what felt like an eternity. The silence was heavy, charged with all the words she'd said, all the tears I'd cried. You came, she said finally, her voice a dry rasp, stripped of its former commanding tone. I did. I didn't think you would. She looked down at her lap, at hands that were now just knuckles and veins. I suppose I deserve that. I said nothing. I wouldn't give her absolution. I'm dying, Amara. She stated it as a fact, not for sympathy. I heard. A weak, rattling cough shook her frame. I asked you here to say I'm sorry. I know those words mean nothing. They're too small, but they're true. For what it's worth, in this place with this ending, I see what I was, what I did to you, to Darnell, to that sweet boy. Hearing her say Miles's name sent a jolt through me. Don't, I said, my voice harder than I intended. Don't talk about him. She flinched, a genuine reaction. Okay, fair. She took a labored breath. I also asked you here to tell you something. Something about Darnell's father. That was unexpected. I knew nothing about him. Darnell never spoke of him. Loretta had always said he was out of the picture, a deadbeat. His name was Robert, she began, her gaze drifting to somewhere beyond the wall. He wasn't a bad man, just weak, like Darnell. I broke him with my temper, my demands, my constant belittling. He left when Darnell was 4. Sent money for a while, then stopped. I told Darnell he abandoned us because he didn't love him. It was a lie. He left because of me. I drove him away, and then I made my son bear the blame. She looked back at me, her eyes glistening. I was doing the same thing to you, trying to break you, to make you into the villain so I could be the victim, so I could take what I wanted. It's a sickness. I see that now. I saw it in my mother, too. It's a legacy I was proud to carry until it was too late. The confession hung in the air. It wasn't an excuse, it was an explanation, bleak and ugly. Why are you telling me this? I asked. So you understand it wasn't about you. You were just the available target. It was about the sickness in me. And so you can tell Darnell if you ever choose to. He deserves to know his father didn't hate him, that it was me. She coughed again, a deeper, wetter sound. I have a letter for him. The lawyer will give it to you. You can read it, burn it, give it to him. It's yours to decide. I didn't know what to say. The monstrous mother-in-law was gone, replaced by a dying, regretful woman reckoning with her life's damage. It was disorienting. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Amara, she whispered, her energy fading. I don't deserve it, I just needed you to hear it from me before I go. I looked at her, this broken shell in a wheelchair. The fear she'd once inspired was gone, all that was left was pity, a distant, cold pity. The power dynamic had utterly, finally reversed. I heard you, I said softly. Thank you for telling me about Robert. For Darnell's sake. A single tear traced a path through the powder on her cheek. She gave the faintest nod. You're a good mother, a strong woman, I saw that, it's why I tried so hard to break you. I was jealous. That was the last truth and perhaps the most startling. I had nothing left to say. Goodbye, Loretta, I said and meant it as a true farewell. Goodbye, Amara. She managed a ghost of her old, twisted smile, but now it just looked sad. Live well for all of us who couldn't. I placed the phone back in its cradle and stood up. I didn't look back as I left the room. My father was waiting, his eyes searching my face. All right, I nodded, feeling a strange, heavy calm. I'm all right. I took the sealed envelope Attorney Sergeant handed me for Darnell from Loretta and tucked it into my bag. As we walked out into the weak winter sunlight, I felt the last ghost of that nightmare finally, completely release its hold. I had faced her, heard her confession, and felt nothing but a quiet closure. She was no longer a monster in my mind. She was just a sad, sick woman who had chosen evil and died regretting it. Her story was over. Mine was just beginning. The meeting with Loretta brought a final, unsettling peace. But life, as it does, moved on. Miles started first grade, my career hit new heights, and I even tentatively began dating a kind, uncomplicated man named Leo who had no knowledge of my past wars. The letter for Darnell sat in my safe, a dormant secret. I thought the drama was behind us. Then, on a perfectly ordinary afternoon, a social worker appeared at my door. A new, anonymous complaint had been filed with CPS, citing historical concerns about my parenting, backed by vague references to past instability. The battle I thought I'd won was threatening to reopen on a new front. Someone was still pulling strings from the shadows. The doorbell chimed on a Tuesday afternoon, a sound usually reserved for package deliveries. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in her 40s with a serious expression and a laminated badge clipped to her blazer. My heart, which had learned a slow, steady rhythm over the past year, gave a painful, familiar lurch. I opened the door. "Can I help you?" Amara Hayes, she asked, her tone professional but not unkind. "Yes, I'm Claudia Renfro with Child and Family Services. I'd like to speak with you for a few moments if this is a convenient time." She held out her ID for me to inspect. The floor seemed to tilt. CPS. The two letters that had haunted my darkest hours. The air grew thick. "Regarding," I managed, my voice tight. "May I come in? It's best discussed privately." Numbly, I stepped aside. She entered, her eyes doing a quick, discreet scan of the entryway and living room, the tidy space, the basket of toys neatly stacked, the child-sized art proudly displayed on the refrigerator. Miles was at an after-school chess club, thank God. We sat in the living room. "Miss Hayes, we've received an anonymous complaint. It references some historical concerns about your parenting. It mentions a period of instability, potential neglect, and refers to evidence that was part of a prior legal matter. Loretta's video, the forged narrative, it had to be. But how? The evidence was sealed, part of a closed case. That evidence was proven to be fabricated," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "It was part of an extortion case against my former mother-in-law. She was convicted. The court files should show that." Miss Renfro nodded, taking a small notebook from her bag. "I'm aware of the broad outlines of that case, Miss Hayes, and I want to assure you we are required to investigate all complaints. However, given the context, this has been flagged for a senior review. My visit today is primarily to see Miles's living environment and to speak with you directly. This isn't a forensic investigation at this stage. It was a distinction, but a thin one. The panic was a live wire in my chest. Someone had reached out from the past to stir this up. Who? Preston was still in max security. Solomon was out but had kept his head down. Loretta was dead. Darnell, the thought was a knife twist. Who filed the complaint? I asked. It was anonymous, she repeated. But the details referenced are specific enough that it clearly comes from someone with knowledge of your past circumstances. She looked at me directly. Do you have any ongoing concerns for Miles's safety or well-being? Is there anyone who might wish to cause you distress by making such a report? The question was a trap and a lifeline. My son is happy, healthy, and safe. His pediatrician, his teacher, his chess coach, they can all verify that. The only people who ever wished us distress are either incarcerated or deceased. I paused. Except for my ex-husband, Darnell Jenkins, he has supervised visitation. Our relationship is civil for Miles's sake. But he would know the details referenced. I saw her note the name. I see. Would you be willing to sign a release for Miles's medical and school records? It would help us close this file promptly. Yes. Absolutely. I would have signed anything to make her go away, to close this door before it could fully open. The visit lasted 20 more agonizing minutes. She asked about Miles's routine, his diet, his social life. She asked to see his room. It was a bright, clean space filled with books and Legos. She took a few notes, her expression giving nothing away. Finally, she stood. Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Hayes. This seems to be a clean, loving home. I will submit my report, and you should receive a formal letter dismissing the complaint within a few weeks. I'm sorry for the intrusion. The moment the door closed behind her, I collapsed onto the sofa, trembling. The old fear, the one that tasted like copper and dust, had flooded back in an instant. I fumbled for my phone and called my father. 30 minutes later, he was in my living room, his face a storm cloud. He listened as I recounted the visit. Anonymous, he muttered, pacing, but specific, this is harassment. A final jab. Darnell, I asked, my voice small. Possibly, but it feels small for him. He's trying to rebuild his life with his new family. This would be a nuclear option that benefits him nothing and risks his visitation. He stopped, thinking. Preston can't make calls like that from where he is. Loretta is gone, Solomon maybe, but he's a blunt instrument. This is sneaky petty. He pulled out his own phone. Malcolm, he said when the call connected. I need a quiet trace. A CPS complaint filed against Amara in the last 48 hours. Anonymous. See if any of the old connections are making noise, and check on Darnell's recent communications, discreetly. He listened for a moment. Thanks, he hung up and looked at me. We'll find the source. In the meantime, you live your life. You've done nothing wrong. This is just noise. But it was noise that shattered my hard-won peace. For the next week, I was jumpy. I watched Miles like a hawk, second-guessing every minor scrape, every picky-eating phase. I dreaded the mail, expecting an official summons. The letter from CPS came as promised. It stated the complaint had been investigated and deemed unfounded. The case was closed. The relief was immense, but it was tinged with a new, lingering anxiety. Someone had tried to hurt us, and I didn't know who. 2 days later, my father came over, a file folder in his hand. Malcolm dug it up, he said, sitting at my kitchen table. The complaint was filed from a public library computer, untraceable. But he listened to some monitored prison calls. Preston had a call with an old associate, a low-level guy named Ray, last month. The conversation was coded, but Malcolm caught a reference to making the bitch sweat for old time's sake and calling in a favor with the kid people. Ray. I remembered the name from the old surveillance logs, one of Preston's flunkies. So it was Preston, I said, anger replacing the fear. From prison, a parting gift, a last bit of psychological warfare orchestrated by a man with nothing left to lose but time, which he has in abundance. My father's voice was cold. It's over, Amara. Ray has been picked up on a parole violation. The message has been sent through channels that any further attempts will make Preston's remaining time considerably less comfortable. The line is dead. He slid the file folder across to me. It contained a single sheet of paper, a copy of the complaint. At the bottom, in my father's precise handwriting, was written, threat neutralized, source. Preston Jenkins via proxy. Status contained, no further action expected. It was his way of giving me the operational all clear, the professional assurance that the enemy was once again defeated. I let out a long, shuddering breath. The ghost had been named, and in naming it, it lost its power. Okay, I said, okay. This time the piece that returned felt more durable. It had been tested and had held. The system, flawed as it was, had worked. My life was not a fragile soap bubble. It was a sturdy structure that could withstand these gusts of malice. A month later, I finally opened my safe and took out Loretta's letter. I still hadn't decided what to do with it. I drove to a park, sat on a bench, and read it. It was a raw, unpolished apology to Darnell. It confessed to driving his father away, to manipulating him, to using his love as a weapon. It didn't ask for forgiveness, only understanding. It ended with, don't be like me, love your new family freely, be the man I wouldn't let you be. It was, I realized, the only truly selfless thing Loretta Jenkins had ever done. I didn't give it to Darnell immediately. I waited for his next supervised visit with Miles. After they had finished playing in the park, as my father walked Miles to the car to get a sweater, I handed Darnell the sealed envelope. This is from your mother, I said quietly. She gave it to me before she died. I haven't opened it, it's for you. He stared at the envelope as if it were a live snake, fear and longing warring on his face. Finally he took it, his fingers trembling. "Thank you," he mumbled, stuffing it into his jacket pocket without opening it. He looked at me, then really looked at me. "Amara, the CPS thing, that wasn't me." "I swear, I know," I said, and I did. He nodded, a weight seeming to lift from him. He turned and walked to his car. I didn't know if he would read the letter or what it would change if he did, but I had passed on the message. My part was done. As I watched him drive away, I felt a chapter not just close but seal itself shut. The past had thrown its last feeble punch. It was time to stop looking over my shoulder and start looking ahead. Years flowed by like a peaceful river. Miles grew into a bright, kind teenager. My career flourished and I found a lasting, equal partnership with Leo. My father, Vernon, settled into a contented retirement, his greatest joy being his family. The past was a closed book. Then, on the eve of Miles's high school graduation, a poised young woman approached me at a restaurant. She introduced herself as Alina, Darnell's daughter from his second marriage. She had a request. She was applying to colleges and wanted to understand her family's complicated history, specifically the story of her grandmother, Loretta. She had heard fragments from her father, who still carried his shame silently. She turned to me, the woman who had survived her grandmother, for the truth. The past was knocking, not with malice but with a young person's need to understand. Telling the story meant revisiting the pain, but could it also be a final act of healing? For her, for Darnell, and even unexpectedly for me. The call came on a perfect spring Saturday. Miles, now a lanky 17-year-old with his grandfather's thoughtful eyes, was sprawled on the living room floor, surrounded by college acceptance letters. Yale, Stanford, and his first choice, MIT, all vied for his attention. My father, Vernon, now with a distinguished silver streak at his temples, was helping him parse financial aid packages with the focus of a general planning a campaign. Leo was in the kitchen, whistling as he prepared his famous lasagna for our celebration dinner. The air was thick with the scent of garlic, basil, and unabashed joy. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, loath to break the spell of the moment, but something made me answer. Amara Hayes, it was a young woman's voice, polite but uncertain. "Yes, speaking. My name is Alina Jenkins. I'm Darnell Jenkins's daughter." The name in this context was a surreal intrusion. I hadn't spoken to Darnell in years, beyond the necessary logistics of his monthly visits with Miles, which had evolved from supervised to occasional dinners as Miles grew older. Darnell had been a distant but consistent figure, polite, grateful, forever marked by his past. He'd built a quiet life, a modest business, and had a daughter, Alina, with his second wife. I knew of her only as a name, a photo Darnell had once shyly shown Miles. "Hello, Alina," I said, moving into the hallway for privacy. "Is everything all right?" "Oh yes, everything's fine, I'm sorry to bother you. I got your number from my dad, I had to ask him a few times." She took a steadying breath. "I'm a senior in high school and I'm working on a personal history project for one of my applications. It's about family narratives and resilience. My dad, he doesn't talk much about his past, about his mother, but I know something big happened. I've heard whispers, seen him get quiet. I found some old newspaper articles about a trial." Her voice trailed off, vulnerable. "I was wondering if you might be willing to talk to me, to tell me your side of the story. I want to understand." The request was like a stone dropped into the still pond of my present. Ripples of the past spread out, touching shores I thought I'd left forever. I saw my father glance up from the table, sensing the shift in my demeanor. "Alina, that's a very heavy thing to ask," I said gently. "That story involves a lot of pain. For me, for your father, for Miles when he was little." "I know," she said quickly, her voice earnest. "And I don't want to cause any pain, I feel like there's this shadow over my dad and I don't understand it. He's a good man, he's kind to me and my mom, but there's this sadness in him that he won't explain. I think understanding might help me, help us." Her maturity struck me. This wasn't gossip seeking. This was a young woman trying to make sense of her father's scars. I thought of the letter from Loretta, still unmentioned, a secret between Darnell and his past. I thought of Miles, who knew the basic facts of Grandma was a bad person who went to jail, but had been spared the visceral details. "Let me think about it, Alina. Can I call you back in a day or two?" "Of course, thank you, Miss Hayes, thank you so much." I hung up and leaned against the wall. Leo poked his head out of the kitchen, a question in his eyes. I gave a small, reassuring smile and walked into the living room. "Who was that, Mom?" Miles asked, looking up from a Stanford brochure. I sat down. "That was Alina, Darnell's daughter." Miles's eyebrows shot up. "My half-sister." I guess weird, what did she want? I explained her request. Miles listened, his expression thoughtful. He'd met Alina a handful of times at awkward family dinners Darnell had insisted on, but they were strangers separated by age and a chasm of history. My father was the first to speak. It's a risk telling that story, it gives power back to the past. But, he added, his gaze softening, it can also be a way to finally bury it, to transform it from a secret wound into a known history. The truth told on your terms can't be used against you anymore. What do you think, Miles? I asked. This was his history too. He shrugged, a very teenage gesture, but his eyes were serious. I mean, I know the basics. Grandma Loretta was a criminal. Grandpa saved us. It's like a family legend, but real. He paused. If she wants to know, maybe she should. It's her family too. And Dad, he never talks about it. Maybe it would be good for someone to know the whole story so it's not just this dark, silent thing. His insight, so clear and compassionate, moved me. My son, the child who had been at the center of the storm, was advocating for truth and healing. 2 days later, I met Alina at a quiet cafe. She was a beautiful girl with Darnell's warm eyes but none of his haunted uncertainty. She carried a small notebook but promised she was just there to listen. Thank you for this, she said, her hands wrapped around her tea mug. I know it's a lot to ask. It is, I agreed, but you're right, secrets have a weight and you deserve to understand your father. I took a deep breath. I'll tell you the story, not as the villain or the victim, but as the person who lived it. And so I told her. I started with the loving marriage, the birth of Miles, the slow, sinister shift as Loretta's care became control. I told her about the threats, the forged documents, the edited video. I described the 2 months of terror, the hunger, the fear, the feeling of being utterly trapped. I saw her eyes widen with horror, her hand fly to her mouth. Then I told her about the chance meeting with my father on the subway platform. I explained in broad strokes what he had done, the surveillance, the planning, the patient, professional dismantling of her grandmother's scheme. I told her about the marked money, the staged heart attack, the recruitment of Darnell. I described the final confrontation in the attorney's office, the arrest, the pleas. I didn't spare Loretta, but I didn't demonize her either. I described her as a sick, greedy woman consumed by a need to possess and control. I told Alina about the final meeting in prison, the dying woman's confession about Robert, Darnell's father. She gave me a letter for your dad, I said softly. An apology, I gave it to him years ago, I don't know if he ever read it. Tears were streaming down Alina's face. My dad, he was part of this. He let this happen. He was under his mother's thumb, Alina. He was weak and he was wrong, profoundly wrong. But he was also a victim of her manipulation in a different way. The man the kind, sad man, that's who he became after. He carries the guilt of what he did every day, that's the shadow you see. She cried quietly for a minute, processing the enormity of it. And your dad? He just fixed it, a smile touched my lips. My dad is a remarkable man, he used the skills from his old life to save my new one. He showed me that even when you're broken, you're not alone. And that there's always a way out if you're smart and brave enough to take it, or if you have someone who loves you enough to build it for you. We talked for another hour. She asked questions, not prurient ones, but deep, searching questions about fear, about resilience, about forgiveness. I found myself speaking truths I hadn't fully articulated even to myself. At the end, she closed her notebook. I won't use this for a project, she said. This is for me, for my family. Thank you, Miss Hayes, for trusting me with this, for surviving it so my dad could have a chance to be better. So I could exist. Her gratitude was humbling. As we parted, she hugged me, a spontaneous, fierce embrace. I'm glad Miles has you for a mom, she whispered. A week later, Darnell called me. His voice was thick with emotion. Alina told me she talked to you. She told me everything you said. I waited, unsure of his reaction. Thank you, he choked out, for being honest with her, for not making me into a monster, for telling her about the letter. I did read it. It took me years. He took a shaky breath. She asked me about Robert. We talked for the first time. We really talked about all of it. I'm glad, Darnell. Amara, I am so sorry every day. I know it doesn't change anything. It changed you, I said quietly, and that changed Alina's life, that's something. We hung up. I looked out the window at the setting sun, painting the sky in oranges and purples. The story was out now. It belonged not just to me, the victim, or to Vernon, the strategist, but to Miles, to Alina, to Darnell. It was a family history, a dark chapter, but one that explained the light that came after. By sharing it, I hadn't reopened a wound. I had finally allowed it to scar over properly, to become part of my skin, strong and known. The past was no longer a ghost, it was a story, and I was no longer just its subject, I was its author. Decades have passed, Amara's life is full, a celebrated career, a lasting marriage, a grandson of her own from Miles. Vernon, now a great-grandfather, enjoys a peaceful old age, his sharp mind still active. The ordeal is a distant memory, a tale of triumph told at family gatherings. Then, a prestigious historical society contacts Amara. They are compiling an archive on everyday resilience in the late digital age, and a journalist, having pieced together the old court records, wants to interview her. They frame it as an inspiring story of a mother's courage. But to tell it to the world means exposing every raw detail to the public eye. Miles's childhood terror, Darnell's weakness, the depths of Loretta's evil. Is the story hers to share on such a scale? Or does protecting her family's peace, finally and fully won, mean letting the last remnants of the past stay buried? The final choice between defining her own narrative and safeguarding her loved one's privacy is the last, unexpected legacy of Loretta Jenkins. The request arrived not by phone, but in a thick, cream-colored envelope with the embossed logo of the Carter Historical Society. It was addressed to Dr. Amara Hazleo. The title still sometimes surprised me. The PhD in economic anthropology had been a later-in-life passion, a testament to the security and space my life now held. Inside was a formal letter from the Society's director. They were launching a multi-year oral history project titled The Fabric of Resilience, Personal Narratives from the Turn of the Century. They were seeking stories of individuals who had overcome profound personal crises, not celebrities but everyday people, and wished to archive their interviews for future scholars. Our researcher, the letter read, has come across public court records from your past legal case. We believe your story of overcoming systemic coercion and reclaiming your life is a powerful example of modern resilience. We would be honored if you would consider sharing your experience in a recorded interview. Your narrative would be preserved in our permanent collection, accessible for academic study, with all identifying details of minor parties redacted or pseudonymed as you wish. I read it twice, then placed it on the dining table, where the morning sun illuminated its formal script. Leo, reading over my shoulder, let out a low whistle. The Carter Society, that's big, they're legit. They want to put my story in a museum, I said, the concept feeling surreal. Not a museum, an archive. For history, he squeezed my shoulder. It's a tribute, my love, they see it as important. But was it my story to archive? It was also Miles's story, his early childhood trauma. It was Darnell's story, his great shame. It was Alina's story, the shadow over her father. It was my father's story, a covert operation he'd never officially acknowledge. And it was Loretta's and Preston's story, a case study in malice. I took the letter to my father's house. He lived in a cozy ground-floor apartment now, his movements slower but his mind as sharp as a tack. My grandson, 3-year-old Oliver, was building a block tower on his great-grandpa's rug, supervised by Miles, who was visiting from Silicon Valley where he was a rising star in AI ethics. I handed the letter to my father. He read it, his face in its familiar, neutral mask. He passed it to Miles. Miles read it, his brow furrowing. He looked at me. What do you think, Mom? I don't know, it feels exposing. Even with redactions, the bones of the story are a matter of public record, but the details, the feelings, those are ours. My father leaned back in his armchair, steepling his fingers. There are two operational considerations here, he said, and we both smiled at the terminology he still used. One, control. If you do this, you control the narrative. You frame the experience as one of resilience and victory. You become the author of the definitive account. Two, exposure. You invite scrutiny. Even with pseudonyms, determined individuals could piece things together. It could ripple out, affect Miles's public profile, Darnell's quiet life, Alina's sense of family. It's not just about me anymore, I said, looking at Oliver, who was now crashing his blocks together with glee. No, my father agreed. It hasn't been for a long time. The operation was to secure the future. This decision is about how that future interacts with the past. Miles was quiet for a moment. For me, he said slowly, it's just facts. I was too little to remember the fear. I know Grandpa saved us. I know it made you stronger. If you want to tell it to help others understand coercion or to show how families can heal, I'm okay with that. I'm proud of you and of Grandpa. Oliver should know that side of his history too, someday, the strength, not the fear. His support was a powerful force. I called Darnell next, feeling it was only right. He listened in silence. It's your story, Amara, he said finally, his voice husky. You paid for it, you have the right to tell it. For me, if my name is changed, I have no objection. Maybe it's good if stories like mine are out there. As a warning about weakness, about the cost of not being brave. There was a painful humility in his words. Finally, I met with the researcher from the Carter Society, a gentle, insightful woman named Dr. Eris. We talked for 2 hours without a recorder. I laid out my concerns about privacy, about the other lives entwined in the narrative. Our primary ethic is do no harm, Dr. Eris assured me. We can use pseudonyms for everyone but you if you wish. We can alter locations, specific job fields. The power of the story isn't in the specific names but in the human experience. The psychology of coercion, the dynamics of family manipulation, the journey from victim to survivor to thriver. That is what scholars will study. Your voice would give authenticity to concepts often discussed in the abstract. I thought about it for a week. I walked through my life, my warm home, my fulfilling work, my happy marriage, my remarkable son, my delightful grandson, my heroic, aging father. All of it was built on the foundation of that terrible time and the victory that followed. One evening, I sat with my father on his small patio, watching the stars emerge. You once said the operation was to solve the problem so they'd never think about us again, I said. Telling this, it's the opposite. It's making the story live on. He nodded, sipping his tea. A different kind of strategy, not concealment but transformation. You take their weapon, the story of your victimhood, and you forge it into a tool. A tool for understanding, for education. You deny them the last word. The final narrative is one of your strength, not their power. His words clarified it for me. Loretta had wanted to silence me, to erase my will. Preston had tried to haunt me with anonymous complaints. They had failed. To tell my story on my terms for a purpose I believed in was the ultimate defiance. It was also a gift to other women who might be in silent prisons of their own, to show that a way out exists, that there can be a life after the fear. I agreed to the interview. The session was held in a quiet room at the Historical Society. Dr. Eris asked thoughtful, empathetic questions. I spoke for 4 hours over 2 days. I talked about the slow, insidious onset of control. I described the isolation, the manufactured evidence, the weaponization of a mother's love. I spoke openly about my despair on that subway platform, and then I told the rest. I told of my father's calm intervention, not as a fairy tale rescue, but as the application of skill and love. I detailed the careful, patient rebuilding of my life, the therapy, the career rebuild, the conscious choice to allow forgiveness where it was safe, to set boundaries where they were vital. I talked about the complex, ongoing relationship with Darnell and the unexpected connection with Alina. I framed it not as a simple tale of good versus evil, but as a messy, human story of damage, choice, and redemption. When it was over, I felt not drained, but oddly lighter. I had given the monster a name, dissected its methods, and showcased its defeat. I had honored my father's quiet heroism. I had claimed my experience as part of my expertise, my wisdom. Months later, the Carter Society sent me a beautifully bound transcript of the interview. On the cover was the project title and a single line, narrator. Dr. Amara Leo, a story of coercion, resilience, and reclamation. I showed it to my family. Leo beamed with pride. Miles read passages aloud to Oliver, simplifying the language. This is about how your grandma and great-grandpa are very brave, he said. My father took the book in his hands, his fingers tracing the title. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he looked at me, his eyes bright. Mission accomplished, he said quietly, with a finality that resonated through the years. And it was. The operation that began on a cold subway platform, a clandestine campaign waged in coffee shops and hospital rooms and attorneys' offices, had reached its ultimate objective. Not just safety, not just justice, but a legacy. A legacy of a life fully lived, a family unbroken, and a story that ended not with a threat but with a voice, clear, strong, and finally completely free. From a trembling woman on a subway platform to a doctor archiving her story for history, Amara Hayes' journey is a testament to the fact that our darkest chapters don't have to define us. They can become the foundation for our greatest strength. The monsters of her past are long gone, but the love, strategy, and resilience that defeated them live on in a thriving family, a purposeful life, and a story that is now and forever hers to tell. Thank you for witnessing her journey.